Hey folks, this is Kelani. I know the idea of a level squish isn't particularly new right now, and it's actually been brought up by Blizzard themselves more than once, but I can't help but be interested in this topic whenever it comes up. It's such a massive undertaking, and they could go about it so many different ways. Some ways that I've seen suggested are pretty bonkers online, if I'm being honest. Everything from making one level take several hours to grind out, to getting rid of leveling in the game entirely. I want to have a chat about why the topic of squishing levels has come up and how they could go about it. First things first, why is the topic of the level squish coming up again? Well, Blizzard has been sending out surveys with some pretty interesting questions. From the sounds of things, the level squish is all but confirmed already. Are you aware that the maximum level of 120 will be reduced in the future, i.e. level squish? The level squish, quote unquote, will reduce the total number of levels required to access the most current game content. The new level cap will be dramatically lower than the current level cap of 120. How much would you like or dislike a reduction in character levels? Well, that's interesting for sure. When it comes to a level squish, the dev team could tackle this in all sorts of ways, but I think it depends on which problems they really want to tackle and how they want to prioritize them. There are some key factors to consider when talking about why we would even need a level squish at this point in time. Firstly, there are a lot of levels to get through. Just talking actual numbers here, 120 levels isn't really all that ideal when you look at the big picture. To start with, it's a daunting number for anyone starting up their first adventure in World of Warcraft. If I tell you that this game is super duper awesome, but it only really gets good when you get to the current expansion, which you have to pay for separately by the way, and that starts in 110 levels. And then when you do get to the current expansion, it's actually really all about the end game anyway, so grind out those 10 extra levels, get to the level cap, and then you can finally start having fun with all the big boys up at the top. 120 levels of gameplay to get to the primary focus of the entire game. I wouldn't be surprised if that fact alone scared off some would-be Azerothians because it looks like a massive time dump before the game gets fun, so reducing the actual number could be useful to bring in new players, but right now we also have a lot of character progression that's spread super thinly. Part of what makes leveling up in any game fun is gaining access to new and more powerful abilities, spells, gear, and anything else that will provide you with a sense of progression. For World of Warcraft, we have new abilities, new talents, new gear, and special milestones like obtaining your first mount, upgrading that mount to go faster, and then eventually unlocking the ability to fly. Those four things make up a good chunk of the progression system while you're leveling. The problem that we have with 120 levels right now is that it's all spread out too thinly. Most levels don't mean anything. You get quite a lot of abilities when you level up through 1 to 60, but after that it falls off very quickly. Talents are more spread out, but you have to go 15 levels between most talent tiers. That's a lot of time where you don't see any progress in the talent window whatsoever. Gear is done a bit better. You'll upgrade gear pretty steadily as you level up if you're doing it naturally, but with the introduction of heirloom gear, you kind of ignore an entire area of progression these days while leveling, but that's typically if you've already leveled up once before. Many new players won't have access to heirlooms, so gear should still work fairly well for them. The milestones are also pretty good in the current state of things, though I would imagine earning flying and then having it taken away several times when you hit certain areas of the game will be a bit jarring for any newer players and just an annoyance for the veterans out there. So a level squish could allow the dev team to spread out your character progression more evenly, maybe even to the point where you get something interesting every level instead of having to wait 10, 15 or even 20 levels to see a new ability later on in the leveling process. But leveling also takes quite a long time right now, so you have to make a decision between keeping the time taken to level the same and reducing the actual level cap, or reducing the time it takes to level at the same time as reducing the level cap. If we go back down to a level 60 cap, but it takes twice as long to get each level, that's a very different change than if we can suddenly level twice as fast. There's valid concerns on both sides of that argument, but I don't think it's quite as simple as just halving the level cap. There is a lot of content in World of Warcraft. That's one of the reasons why it's still so popular to this day. Even if a new expansion doesn't do incredibly well, you have access to so many other parts of the game, so many other expansions that are full of dungeons, raids, quests, storylines, collectibles, and even unique systems. It's crazy how much there is to do if you go out there and do absolutely everything there is to do in the game. It shouldn't really be too surprising though, I guess. The game has been running for 15 years, but all of that content also makes up part of the problem. Because of how expansions have been introduced over the years, you have to work your way through every single one to get up to speed. I guess that's not entirely true anymore since the scaling changes made to leveling that allow you to pick and choose one expansion or another, but you're still locked in a little bit. You can't go to Mist of Pandaria zones or Warlords of Draenor zones at level 60, for example, so there is a little bit of choice, but it's also still quite linear. As I said before, you have a lot of ground to cover before you can get a new character up to speed with the current expansion. So now you have another choice to make regarding the level squish. Do you keep everything as it is now and just scale it down? So vanilla is maybe 1 to 20, TBC and Wrath are 20 to 30, Kata and Mop are 30 to 40, Warlords and Legion are 40 to 50, and then you just work it out from there. I'm not so sure that would be the best thing for the game. A lot of this content is outdated, there's no other way to say it. The quests don't flow as well, the zones don't look as good, and bits of pieces everywhere are kind of broken. Some quests don't work properly with scaling, others sometimes just don't work at all. Some of the content you're working your way through as you level is over 12 years old. That's pretty mind-boggling, but it also sets a bit of a weird precedent for the rest of the game. Questing and leveling is pretty decent for the most part in Legion and Battle for Azeroth. It's a significant step up from some of the older expansions at any rate, at least in terms of quality. We can argue whether leveling is fun or not until the cows come home, but having to get through some outdated areas of the game before you get to the more interesting fun areas, because they've had a lot of time to figure out how to actually make questing more relevant, more fun and more interesting, it's kind of weird, and it reinforces the idea that you have to play for a long time before you actually get to the good stuff. Most of the expansions also don't make any sense anymore. Going from the revamped vanilla experience into the Burning Crusade expansion is odd because at that point in time, TBC wasn't relevant anymore. The stuff it's gone, that already happened. Going to Wrath has the same issue. The Kata leveling zones make a bit more sense, but you have to take a hiatus in either TBC or Wrath to get back to the story you started for the majority of your leveling so far. Then we have Mist of Pandaria, Warlords of Draenor and Legion to get through, all of which change up key characters and their major storylines don't even get resolved properly anymore because you're not going to go through the entire expansion. You just have to look at the War Chief of the Horde to see how messed up the leveling process is. You go from Garrosh to Thrall, then back to Garrosh, then to Vol'jin and then to Sylvanas, and all the while half of them stick around because the NPC has to be available for quests. And don't get me started on expansion-specific features. Going into Warlords of Draenor and setting up your garrison is still a pretty cool experience when you do it for the first time. You get to build, fortify, and command a garrison in the treacherous new lands you're about to explore. Except you never go back. You finish leveling in Warlords and you move on. I doubt anyone even gets to a garrison level 2 while leveling up these days, unless they're purposefully going for it. It just seems weird for it to be talked about as if it's something important, and then it's skipped over entirely. When you get into Legion, you have the same thing with artifact weapons. These amazing, awesome weapons of legend and lore that we need to empower to defeat the Burning Legion, except they start off depleted. Why are they depleted? What happened? Any artifact power you get from questing or monsters is vendor trash, you can't use it at all. It makes sense for the players who went through the entire expansion and did it when it was actually relevant, but it's just confusing for anyone who might be new to the game. The same thing is going to happen with Battle for Azeroth, no doubt. You'll get the Heart of Azeroth from Magni, you'll be told of its potential and power and how we need to gather Azerite to save Azeroth, and the heart will be completely inert. You won't do anything with it. You know there's a problem with how the leveling process works because Blizzard lets you skip over the entire thing for one character when you buy the latest expansion. I doubt anyone would pick up WoW these days if that character boost wasn't offered up on a silver platter, because it's a massive chore to get through 120 levels in almost every way. If you're a new player, you don't even know if you're going to enjoy the endgame by the time you get there. So how do you fix it, and is a level squish really the answer? I think it could be, but it depends on why the dev team want to do a level squish. If it's just to reduce the number of levels, then it probably won't do much at all. If they want to reduce the time it takes to level, I guess this could be one option, but it wouldn't necessarily be the best one. If they want to give you the option to skip over outdated content or create a smoother leveling process where the story actually makes sense, then I think this would be much better for the game as a whole. Leveling doesn't have to take forever, but I think it should be meaningful. If you introduce expansions episodically, like how they have been so far in World of Warcraft's lifetime, then progressing through them when they're old should probably be offered as an option rather than a mandatory pathway, especially if they contain temporary systems or features like artifact weapons. You could do this in a variety of ways. I think it's still super important to introduce characters to the world somewhat slowly to begin with, so vanilla could be used for 1 to 30 leveling paths, with key storylines explained and fleshed out. From that point on, you could open things up entirely and give players the freedom to choose where you level up from that point onwards. You could continue learning about the old world with vanilla, or you could go to a specific location to learn about the history of the game. The Caverns of Time would work perfectly, but it's not the only location that could work. Give players the option to peer back through the veils of time and explain the older expansions as the history of the world rather than treat it as the current goings-on. So you could pick from any expansion past that point and continue leveling however you want. When a new expansion releases, add the last expac that we had into the pool of the world history. So when the next expac comes out, BfA would be added to the pool to continue your leveling. That would make every expansion optional without removing the content that it provides. It would give the dev team an opportunity to create an actual timeline that we could follow along with, and they could reduce the level cap and even the time required to level at the same time. The only problem I could see with this approach is what to do when the level cap starts increasing again. You can shift the goalposts, I guess, so the flexible section of leveling goes from 30 to 60, with 60 to 70 being the new level cap, but introducing more levels will put us back in the same place as where we started. We've seen it happen before. This isn't the first squish in World of Warcraft. The stat squish has come around twice at this point, and we should expect to see another one after the next expansion at the very latest. We always end up in the same place, dealing crazy amounts of damage and then getting toned all the way back down, and then we work our way back up to dealing crazy amounts of damage, and the cycle keeps going. I think if the dev team wants to continue adding levels, then we need a solution for the level squish to be something that can either be repeated quite easily, so we can do it again when that inevitably needs to be done, or create a cycle where an older expansion is put into a pool, like the idea I explained earlier. It would be smart to do this right the first time, so more issues aren't created later on down the road when they try to do it again. One option would be to stop increasing the level cap. WoW wouldn't be the first game to do it, and there are other options for progressing in a new expansion. You could make reputations more important, and instead of gaining experience and new levels while questing, we just gain reputation and level up that way instead. They could also introduce expansion-specific levels that are only relevant to that expansion, but then we get into the issue of expansion-specific features again. I'm pretty sure Ian actually mentioned the problem of increasing the level cap when the idea of a level squish was first brought up on the Q&A, so we might see an expansion where the level cap doesn't increase one of these days, but for now I think the dev team really needs to focus on what leveling issues they want to fix with the level squish. If they just want to reduce the actual number of levels, then a level squish is pretty meaningless and doesn't really do anything. If they want to rearrange leveling so it actually makes sense, then a level squish could be amazing for the game as a whole going forward. The biggest problem that I see is that the more issues they want to tackle at once, the longer the level squish is going to take to implement. I honestly think it's far more likely that we won't see a level squish that actually does much whatsoever, because it would take way too much time to do it properly in a way that addresses more than just the number of levels we have to work through. That's time that can be used making the next expansion the best game it possibly could be, or shoring up the weaker sides of battle for Azeroth for the next year. The Cataclysm expansion fell a little flat because a lot of time and effort was poured into recreating the entire 1 to 60 world. I don't think Blizzard would want to walk that very same path again, so I would be surprised if we saw a level squish anytime soon, at least on a level that would cause sweeping changes throughout the entire game. We might see the actual number halved and everything halved alongside it, and then the levels we gain in the new expansion could be made more meaningful somehow. We'll have to wait and see. But as I said at the start of the video, from the questions that are being asked in the survey, it sounds like they already have something planned. We just don't know what that something will entail. But that's all my thoughts on a level squish that might or might not be just over the horizon. So that's it for this video. What do you think about the idea of a level squish? What would you like the new level cap to be? Back down to 60 or maybe something a little different? 70, 80, what's your number? How would you like old expansions to be handled if a level squish does happen? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave. If you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.